the heir to the Manhattan elite, added both me and my roommate on Snapchat. He was incredibly warm to me, yet to Kathy, the gorgeous campus queen, he was ice cold. She looked annoyed. I thought Dominic was here for me. Can't believe he is chasing you. I was over the moon. We dated online for 2 whole months, but the day we finally met in person, his brows pulled together in a tight frown. Why is it you, Dominic Lancaster? Had the wrong girl? All the affection, the late-night calls, and the sweet texts meant for Kathy Shawn, he had mistakenly given to me. Instead, he had accidentally ghosted the girl he actually wanted. A soft breeze drifted past. He leaned against his sleek Aston Martin, pinching the bridge of his nose in sheer frustration. He shot me a helpless, almost pitying look. You should head back. I will text you tonight. I forced back the tears burning in my eyes. Okay, but I was not stupid. Some things were just too cruel to say to a girl's face. My dorm was empty when I got back. I crawled into bed and fell into a heavy, suffocating sleep. Loud voices woke me up. Kathy stood in the center of the room, clutching a massive bouquet of deep red roses. Her other 2 roommates were practically shouting over each other. So it was just a mix-up. I knew it. There was no way a guy like him would pass you up for Jenny. Kathy offered a gentle practice smile. It was just a misunderstanding. She turned her gaze to me. Jenny, I am apologizing on Dominic's behalf. You are not mad, right? I sat up, forcing my face into a blank mask. No. She let out a soft laugh. Makes sense. Was only 2 months of texting. Anyway, you probably did not even like him that much. Kathy was wrong. I had been secretly in love with Dominic for years. He was 3 years older than me by the time I was a freshman. He was a senior and barely ever on campus. It happened right after freshman orientation. He was back at the university to pick up some paperwork. I took a nasty fall on the concrete steps, and he was the one who drove me to the but I was too painfully shy. I never asked for his number. I never even told him my name. After he graduated, he became a ghost. All I knew was that he came from old money, built a massive tech empire from the ground up, and lived in a world of penthouses and private jets. We were from completely different universes until recently. At a frat party, he asked for my socials. He was incredibly attentive. We texted from morning until night. And it did not take long for us to make it official. Looking back now, it was a joke. Every ounce of joy, every sweet good morning text, it was all meant for Kathy. My phone lit up, a text from Dominic. He did not waste a single breath. Let us just end this here. Make sure you delete our chat logs. I do not want Kathy seeing any of it. To make up for the mix-up, my assistant will wire you 50 grand. 50 grand. To a broke college student like me, it was life-changing money. To him, it was pocket change. He was literally buying my silence, erasing everything we had. I stared at the glowing screen for a long time, before typing out a single word. Okay. I paused, then added a follow-up. I will not say a word about our conversations. You have my promise. But the message bounced back. Not delivered. He had already blocked me. Staring at that little red exclamation mark, my hand started to shake uncontrollably. I scrolled up. We had talked about everything. When he was in London for business, he sent me photos of his espresso, told me about the investors he hated, and complained about the jet lag. Once I asked him to help me with a tricky finance assignment, he texted back saying he was in the shower. I teased him. Prove it. He actually did. He sent a photo. His hair was dripping wet, water sliding down the sharp, gorgeous angles of his face. He radiated this raw, dangerous magnetism. My face had burned hot. Okay. Delete it before I die of embarrassment. A second later, he sent a voice note, his voice dark and thick with amusement. Why are you scared? You will have to look at it every day. Eventually, I will have. You know, I have never been with anyone, but doing it with you, I think that would be incredibly fun. I had literally Googled what to expect for my first time. That very night. Now looking at those exact words, it was nothing but a humiliating fantasy. I deleted every single message. I stopped Googling his tech firm. I stopped reading his Forbes interviews. But I lived in the same cramped dorm as Kathy. And his name was constantly on her lips. She bragged that they were officially a couple. He had asked her out that night. He rented out an entire VIP cinema for her. When she finally gathered the courage to reach for his hand, he suddenly shifted away. He acts like a total player, but he is weirdly old-fashioned. She complained to us. Honestly, he makes me a little insecure. He is too perfect. Women throw themselves at him constantly. I bit my tongue. Dominic was fiercely loyal. He had no messy exes, no female best friends. The only time he ever made a move was when he asked for Kathy's number. That was how much he wanted her. One of our roommates chimed in, "You should ask him to take you to the Hamptons this weekend. Just the 2 of you in a hotel suite. Trust me, he will make a move. If you are nervous, invite us along. We can be your wing women. I let out a heavy breath, shoved my AirPods in, and cranked the volume to the max. Just then, a girl from down the hall knocked on our open door. Is Jenny here? Rowan Pierce is downstairs looking for you. The entire room went dead silent. Kathy's smile completely vanished. Her brows pulled together sharply. You know Rowan Pierce. I shook my head. I have never met him, but the girl insisted he had specifically asked for me by name. Panicking that something was seriously wrong, I rushed downstairs. Rowan was waiting by the courtyard. Everyone knew exactly who he was. Filthy rich, top of his class, with the kind of lazy, heartbreaker good looks that made girls ruin their lives. Yet strangely, the guy had never dated anyone. Freshman year, Kathy had sent someone to ask for his number. She was entirely convinced her looks made her invincible. Rowan turned her down flat. Because of that bruised ego, nobody in our dorm was allowed to mention his name. And now he was leaning against a brick pillar, furiously typing on his phone. He looked extremely irritated. I walked up to him, shrinking a little. I am sorry, did I keep you waiting? He clicked his tongue. He looked up. Whatever he was about to say died in his throat. His eyes flickered over my face for a split second before he narrowed them. You're Jenny, I nodded. He fell silent. When he finally spoke, tone was bizarre. My cousin's ex-girlfriend. I froze. It took my brain a solid 10 seconds to connect the dots. I had only ever been in one relationship, but I had never associated the word ex with Dominic Lancaster. You mean Dominic? I asked cautiously. He nodded, yeah. Hardly anyone on campus knows about us. Please keep it to yourself. I mumbled. He agreed. Then he pulled a crisp folded check from his leather jacket. He told me to give you this, right? The payoff. I took it without hesitating and shoved it in my pocket. Just then his phone rang. I was standing close enough to see the caller ID. Dominic. Rowan did not even bother stepping away. He answered it with a lazy drawl. Yeah, silence on the other end for a beat. Did you see her? Under the pale moonlight. Rowan lifted his gaze and stared right at me. Saw her. Gave her the envelope. My chest tightened. Dominic was just calling to make sure the transaction was complete. I did not want to hear the rest. I turned around and slipped quietly back into the building. When I pushed the door open, Kathy was standing right by the window. I thought Rowan Pierce was actually trying to sweep you off your feet, she said, her voice dripping with venom. Turns out he was just acting as a delivery boy. I barely even looked at you. What did he hand you? Anyway, I stayed quiet. I could hardly tell her. It was hush money from her new billionaire boyfriend. Nothing important. I grabbed my pajamas and locked myself in the bathroom before she could interrogate me further. When I stepped out, the air in the room was thick with tension. Kathy was doing her skincare routine, her phone on speaker on her desk. She was talking to Dominic. She asked if they could go up to the Hamptons for the weekend. I will have my assistant book the penthouse suite. His deep voice replied smoothly. Kathy giggled. I am going to bring 2 of my friends along. Is that okay? Over the speaker, the sharp sound of shattering glass echoed through the line. Kathy jumped. What happened? Are you okay? Dominic's voice dropped, sounding a little tight. Just knocked over a glass. I am fine. Over the next few days, they called each other every single night. Sometimes the conversations crossed into intimate territory. Who was your first kiss? She teased him once. A low, rough chuckle rumbled from the speaker. Never had one. I have been saving it for you. Every time they talked, I had to pretend I was deaf, burying my face in my textbooks. I stopped talking to people. Whenever a random guy asked for my number, I would explicitly introduce myself with my full name, terrified of another mistaken identity. By the weekend, Kathy and her 2 followers packed their designer duffels and left. I finally breathed, but the very next morning, the campus counselor called me in a panic. She needed Kathy for an emergency paperwork issue regarding her scholarship. None of the 3 girls were answering their phones. It is extremely urgent. Do you have any way to reach her? The moment she asked, a cold dread pooled in my stomach. They were with Dominic. What if they had gotten into an accident? My palms started sweating. I had Dominic's number memorized. I typed it in and hit call. The number you have dialed is unavailable. He really blocked my actual phone number, too. He was incredibly thorough. He wanted every trace of my existence completely wiped from his life. Left with no other choice, I sprinted down 6 flights of stairs to the lobby payphone. By the time I punched in the digits, my lungs were burning. The line rang twice before it connected. I let out a massive sigh of relief and quickly explained that the counselor was desperately trying to reach Kathy. Through the receiver, Dominic's voice was crisp and detached. They're down in the restaurant eating breakfast. They left their phones in the room. I will let her know, okay? Thank you. I was about to slam the receiver down when I heard the distinct click of a metal lighter. Then came his voice laced with a casual, almost mocking curiosity. Why did you not come with them? I froze. A memory hit me like a truck. A month ago, when we were still dating, Dominic had asked if I got along with my roommates. I had not wanted to sound like a loner, so I lied and said we were close. He had asked me about Kathy blowing up his phone, thinking her account was actually mine. I had defended her, saying she was sweet and did not mean to bother him. Every memory that used to feel like a fairy tale now felt like acid, burning a hole in my chest. I wet my dry lips, preparing to give him a polite, "Hello" excuse. But before I could speak, a soft voice floated through the phone. "Kathy, Dominic. I am so scared of sleeping alone. Can I stay in your suite tonight? I can just take the sofa." Something inside my brain quietly snapped. Without a single word, I slammed the heavy plastic receiver back onto the cradle. My chest heaved as the echo of the plastic clatter vibrated through the empty lobby. For a long time, I just stood there, my hand still resting on the cold, grease-stained receiver of the campus payphone. The silence of the lobby pressed in on me, heavy and suffocating. Through the glass doors, the autumn wind whipped a flurry of dead leaves across the concrete steps, the very steps where, 3 years ago, a quiet freshman had fallen, and a passing senior had shown her a fleeting moment of kindness. I closed my eyes. What a fool I've been. The girl Dominic had fallen in love with over those 2 months of late-night calls and teasing texts didn't exist to him anymore. Or rather, she had been overwritten by a prettier, more acceptable face. The moment he realized the witty, sharp finance student he had been pouring his heart out to was just plain, quiet Jenny, and not the gorgeous campus queen Kathy, his entire demeanor had shifted to ice. He didn't want a girl. He wanted a trophy that matched his pristine, Forbes-featured life. And he had paid $50,000 to make sure his mistake never stained his reputation. I pulled my hand away from the payphone, feeling a sudden, icy clarity wash over me. I was done crying. I was done hiding in the shadows of a dorm room that felt more like a cage. I walked upstairs, my steps steady for the first time in weeks. When I unlocked the door, the room was empty, smelling faintly of Kathy's expensive French perfume. I looked at my small, cramped desk, then at the sleek designer suitcases Kathy had left behind. I pulled out my phone and checked my bank account. The transfer from Dominic's assistant had cleared 3 days ago. $50,000. To Dominic, it was a rounding error. To me, it was freedom. I spent the next 2 hours packing. I didn't have much, just my clothes, my textbooks, and a few personal belongings. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange, I had signed a lease on a tiny, furnished studio apartment 3 blocks off campus. It was small, but it had a lock on the door, a window that looked out over a quiet alley, and most importantly, no speakerphone calls to Dominic Lancaster. When the movers took the last of my boxes, I left a simple note on Kathy's desk, decided to move closer to my classes. Good luck with Dominic. I didn't block her. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing she had driven me out. I just wanted to disappear from her narrative, to become the background character I was always meant to be. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of academic focus. Freed from the toxic atmosphere of the dorm, I threw myself into my studies. I was a senior finance major, and my heavy course load finally felt like a sanctuary rather than a chore. I spent my mornings in the quietest corners of the university library, surrounded by dusty textbooks and the comforting smell of old paper. I used a small portion of Dominic's hush money to pay off my remaining tuition, feeling a grim sense of irony that his desire to erase me was the very thing securing my future. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when the peace of my new routine was broken. I was sitting in the back of the library, staring at a complex portfolio risk assessment model on my laptop. The numbers were blurring together, and my head throbbed. "Your covariance matrix is off," a low, dry voice murmured from above me. I jumped, looking up quickly. Rowan Pierce stood beside my table, a leather messenger bag slung over his shoulder. He wore a simple black cashmere sweater, his dark hair damp from the rain outside. He looked, as he always did, effortlessly striking. The kind of boy who didn't have to try to draw every eye in the room, yet looked entirely bored by the attention. "What?" I blinked, my heart thudding against my ribs. Without asking, Rowan pulled out the chair opposite me and sat down. He spun my laptop around with a single, long-fingered hand. He tapped a row on the screen. "You didn't adjust for the short-selling constraints. It's skewing your entire frontier curve." I stared at him, then at the screen. He was right. I had missed a crucial variable. "How did you?" "I took this class sophomore year," Rowan said, leaning back in his chair. He crossed one leg over the other, studying me with a cool, unreadable gaze. Though, to be fair, I didn't expect to see Dominic's quiet little ex-girlfriend struggling with basic portfolio theory. My face burned. "I told you, please don't call me that." "And we weren't, it was a mistake." "A $50,000 mistake," Rowan noted, his voice dropping to a quiet drawl that barely carried over the hum of the library's ventilation. My cousin usually has better financial sense. Paying that much to hush up a girl who looks like she'd rather swallow glass than talk to the campus paper seems like a poor return on investment. Why do you care? I asked, my voice trembling slightly as I tried to regain my composure. You delivered the check. Your job is done. Wasn't a job. It was a favor, Rowan said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, matte black pen, twirling it idly between his fingers. Dominic was frantic. He called me 3 times in one morning because his personal assistant was stuck in Chicago. He kept saying he needed someone trustworthy to handle it quietly. I was curious. Curious about what? About the girl who managed to make my cousin lose his mind for 2 months, Rowan said, his dark eyes locking onto mine. There was a sharp, predatory intelligence in his gaze that made me want to shrink back, yet I forced myself to hold his eyes. Dominic is a machine. He doesn't do spontaneous. He doesn't do late-night texting. For him to spend weeks whispering sweet nothings to a screen, only to realize he had the wrong contact. Rowan let out a soft, mocking laugh. It's the most hilarious thing that's happened to our family in a decade. I'm glad my humiliation is your entertainment, I said bitterly, reaching forward to pull my laptop back. Rowan's hand shot out, gently but firmly catching my wrist. His skin was warm, his grip surprisingly strong. I'm not laughing at you, Jenny. I'm laughing at him. I froze, staring at his hand on my wrist. He let go slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. He's an idiot, Rowan said quietly. He always has been. He thinks because he built a tech empire, he can control the world. He thinks he can buy a clean slate. But you can't buy back the way you felt when you were typing those messages, can you? I looked away, a lump rising in my throat. Rowan's words cut too close to the bone. The memory of those sweet, lingering texts, the dry humor, the shared ambition, the vulnerability Dominic had shown me when he thought I was someone else, still lingered like a phantom limb. He doesn't feel anything for me, I whispered. He wants Kathy. Does he? Rowan raised an eyebrow. Have you seen him lately? I shook my head. I moved out of the dorm. Rowan's lips curved into a tiny, genuine smile. Wise choice. Because from what I hear, the golden couple is rotting from the inside out. Over the next week, Rowan's words proved prophetic. Though I tried to avoid the campus gossip mills, it was impossible to completely escape the noise. Kathy and Dominic were the talk of the university, but the narrative had shifted. Instead of the fairy tale romance Kathy had envisioned, rumors were whispering of a cold, strained relationship. Classmates whispered about how Dominic rarely visited, and when he did, he looked tense, barely touching her. Kathy was constantly on edge, her perfect, practiced smiles slipping more and more in public. I tried to ignore it all, focusing entirely on my upcoming midterms. But destiny, it seemed, wasn't done with me. It was a Friday evening, and the campus was mostly empty as students headed out for the weekend. I was walking across the quad toward the library to return some reference books when a sleek, silver Aston Martin pulled up to the curb, its engine purring like a caged beast. My stomach dropped. I knew that car. The door swung open, and Dominic Lancaster stepped out. He looked different. The immaculate, untouchable billionaire I had seen 2 weeks ago was gone. His tie was loosened, his collar unbuttoned, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked tired, exhausted even. Jenny, he said, his voice cutting through the quiet evening air. I stopped, my grip tightening on the heavy books in my arms. Dominic. He closed the car door and walked toward me, his step slow, almost hesitant. It was a bizarre sight. Dominic Lancaster, the tech prodigy who commanded boardrooms of 50-year-old investors, looked nervous. I need to talk to you, he said, stopping a few feet away. We have nothing to talk about, I said, my voice remarkably steady despite the frantic beating of my heart. You bought my silence, remember? I kept my promise. I haven't said a word to Kathy. Dominic flinched, a flash of pain crossing his handsome features. It's not about that. I wanted to ask how you were doing. Rowan told me you moved out of your dorm. I did. Thanks to your $50,000, I could afford a nice, quiet place. I turned to walk away. Goodbye, Dominic. Jenny, wait. He reached out, his hand grasping my shoulder. The moment his fingers touched my coat, a strange, electric shock seemed to run through him. He froze, his eyes widening as he stared down at me. Don't touch me, I said, stepping back, shaking his hand off. You're still wearing it, he whispered, his eyes dropping to my collarbone. I frowned, confused, before realizing what he was looking at. Under my coat, the collar of my simple knitted sweater was slightly parted, revealing a thin silver chain with a tiny, raw aquamarine pendant. It was a cheap piece of jewelry I had bought at a street fair freshman year. Dominic's breath hitched. The night of the orientation 3 years ago. You were wearing that same necklace. I stared at him, my heart stopping. You remember that? Of course I remember, he said, his voice suddenly thick with emotion. I was rushing to get my graduation paperwork, and I saw a girl trip on the concrete steps. She ruined her knees, but she didn't cry. She just sat there, clutching her books, looking so incredibly small and stubborn. I drove her to the clinic. She was so shy she wouldn't even look me in the eye. But I remembered the necklace. And I remembered. He trailed off, his eyes searching mine with a desperation that terrified me. I remembered the way she looked at me when I handed her a tissue. I felt as if the ground beneath my feet was dissolving. If you remembered, then why? At the frat party, you asked for our socials. You added both of us. I didn't know your name, Dominic said, taking a step closer, his hands twitching at his sides as if he wanted to hold me, but didn't dare. At the party, it was loud, dark. I saw Kathy standing near the entrance, and she was wearing a similar blue necklace. I thought it was her. I asked for her Snapchat, but then her friend, your other roommate, said, "Oh, you should add Jenny too. She's our roommate." In the chaos, I added both. And when I started texting, he let out a ragged breath, pinching the bridge of his nose, the exact gesture he had made the day we met in person. I texted the account that responded with actual substance, Dominic said quietly. The girl who argued with me about market efficiency. The girl who told me my favorite London coffee shop was overpriced. The girl who sent me a picture of her messy desk when I sent her a photo of my office. I thought I was talking to the gorgeous girl from the steps. I thought the universe had given me a second chance. But when we met, I said, my voice barely a whisper, you looked at me like I was a disease. Because I was a coward. Dominic erupted, his voice cracking. He took another step, his eyes burning with a dark, suffocating intensity. I realized my mistake the second I saw you standing by the car. You weren't the perfect girl I had built up in my head to match my lifestyle. My board of directors, my family, the media, they all expect me to be with someone like Kathy. A legacy, a beauty queen, someone who fits the brand. I panicked. I thought if people found out I had spent 2 months pouring my soul out to a quiet, middle-class scholarship student, they'd think I was weak, that I was losing my edge. He reached out again, his fingers hovering just inches from my cheek, trembling. But Kathy is empty, Jenny, he whispered, his voice laced with a desperate, pathetic pleading. Every time she talks, I find myself wishing she would say the things you wrote. She doesn't understand my work. She complains when I have late-night meetings. She doesn't know who I am. I'm living in a nightmare. I want a girl from the text back. I want you. I stared at him, the man I had loved in secret for 3 long years. The man who had occupied my every daydream, whose voice in those voice notes had made my heart race. He was here, standing in front of me, admitting he wanted me. And yet, looking at his handsome, strained face, I felt nothing. The illusion had shattered. The Dominic Lancaster of my dreams was a strong, protective man who had carried me to a clinic when I was hurt. The real Dominic Lancaster was a fragile, image-obsessed coward who had thrown $50,000 at a girl's face because he was too afraid of what his board of directors would think of her background. You want the girl from the texts? I asked softly. He nodded eagerly, a spark of hope lighting up his dark eyes. Yes. We can make it work, Jenny. We can keep it quiet for now and… No. I interrupted, my voice cold and flat. Dominic froze. What? The girl from the text is dead, Dominic, I said. You killed her the moment you sent your cousin to pay her off. You wanted a cheap, hidden affair while you paraded Kathy around as your brand. You don't love me. You love the convenience of my mind and the status of her face. Well, you can't have both. Jenny, please. Keep your 50 grand, I said, stepping past him. I'm keeping it because I earned every penny of it listening to you complain about your investor meetings. But as for us, we're done. Go back to your brand. I didn't look back. I walked away, the sound of the autumn wind swallowing his desperate calls of my name. 2 days later, a massive package arrived at my new studio apartment. It was a gorgeous, handcrafted leather portfolio case, filled with advanced finance textbooks, rare economic journals, and a small, handwritten note. A portfolio matrix is nothing without the right assets. I thought you might find these useful for your final exams. I stared at the note, a small, genuine smile tugging at the corners of my lips. Rowan. Over the next month, Rowan Pierce became a constant, quiet fixture in my life. He didn't push, he didn't demand, and he certainly didn't act like a billionaire savior. Instead, he would show up at my library table with 2 cups of black coffee, sit down, and silently work on his own thesis while I studied. When I had questions about complex financial models, he would explain them with a dry, razor-sharp clarity that made the most difficult concepts seem simple. He never mentioned Dominic, and he never mentioned the payoff. He just treated me like a person, someone with a mind worth knowing. One evening, as we were leaving the library together under a light flurry of early winter snow, I looked up at his sharp profile. Rowan. He didn't look at me, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his heavy wool coat. Why are you doing this? I asked. You could have any girl on this campus. Kathy's friends still talk about how you rejected her like she was nothing. Why spend your night sitting in a dusty library with me? Rowan stopped walking. The streetlights caught the falling snowflakes, dusting his dark hair with silver. He turned to look at me, his expression unusually serious. Because my cousin is a fool, Jenny, he said softly. He looked at you and saw a mistake. I look at you and see the only real thing in a world full of ghosts. He reached out, his gloved hand gently brushing a stray snowflake from my cheek. His touch was warm, deliberate, and entirely devoid of the frantic desperation that had characterized Dominic's. I don't care about the brand, Rowan whispered, his voice carrying a quiet promise that sent a thrill straight down my spine. And I don't buy silence. I'd rather the whole world hear what I have to say to you. The final act of the drama unfolded at the annual business school winter gala. It was the most prestigious event of the semester, held in the grand ballroom of a historic downtown hotel. Everyone who was anyone in the department was there, dressed to the nines. I had hesitated to go, but Rowan had insisted. Using a small portion of my savings, I had bought a simple, elegant emerald green silk slip dress. It wasn't designer, but it fit me perfectly, draping over my curves and making my skin look luminous. I wore my hair up, leaving only a few soft curls to frame my face. And around my neck, I wore the same simple silver aquamarine pendant. When Rowan arrived at my apartment to pick me up, wearing a perfectly tailored classic tuxedo, he stopped dead in the doorway. His eyes swept over me, dark and intense. For a moment, the lazy, arrogant playboy was entirely gone, replaced by a man who looked deeply, profoundly captivated. You look. He cleared his throat, a rare flush of color rising in his cheeks. You look beautiful, Jenny. Thank you, I said, smiling genuinely as I took his offered arm. You don't look too bad yourself, Pierce. The gala was a glittering sea of champagne, silk, and whispered conversations. The moment Rowan and I entered the ballroom, the atmosphere seemed to shift. Heads turned, and whispers broke out like a sudden wave. Rowan Pierce, the untouchable, cynical heir, was attending a public event with a date, and not just any date, but the quiet girl who had suddenly vanished from the campus dorms. Across the room, I spotted them. Kathy was wearing a massive, structured gold gown that screamed of wealth and desperation. She looked stunning, but her face was tight with stress. Beside her stood Dominic, looking handsome but utterly miserable in his tuxedo. His eyes were scanning the crowd, completely ignoring the dean who was currently speaking to him. Then, his eyes landed on us. I saw the exact moment his heart seemed to stop. His gaze locked onto my emerald dress, then shifted to my arm looped securely through Rowan's. His face went entirely pale, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his champagne glass. Jenny, Rowan murmured, his voice low and steady near my ear. Are you ready? More than ready, I whispered back. We walked deeper into the room, mingling with professors and classmates. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel shy. I felt light, confident, and entirely in control of my own destiny. It didn't take long for the storm to break. As the music faded between sets, Kathy marched over to us, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Dominic followed a few steps behind, looking as if he were walking to his own execution. Well, Kathy said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, though her eyes were flashing with venom. I see you finally managed to drag yourself out of your little hole, Jenny. And with Rowan, no less. I didn't know you took charity cases, Rowan. Several nearby students paused, their conversations dying down as they smelled blood in the water. Rowan didn't even blink. He took a sip of his champagne, looking down at Kathy with a lazy, bored amusement. I don't. That's why I'm here with Jenny. Her mind is easily the most valuable asset in this room. Kathy's face contorted in anger. She turned her gaze to me, her voice rising slightly so the surrounding crowd could hear. Don't act so high and mighty, Jenny. We all know what you are. You're just a charity case Dominic took pity on. He paid you $50,000 to pack up your things and get out of our lives because you were making things uncomfortable. A collective gasp rippled through the nearby crowd. Whispers erupted. Dominic's face went from pale to ash gray. Kathy, shut up, he hissed, reaching for her arm. No, Dominic. Kathy snapped, shaking him off. She was too fueled by wine and weeks of accumulated rejection to care about discretion. Let everyone know. She tried to steal you, and you paid her off like the trash she is. I looked at Kathy, then at Dominic, who looked as if he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. Finally, I looked at Rowan, who gave me a small, encouraging nod. I stepped forward, my voice calm, clear, and perfectly carrying across the silent ballroom. He didn't pay me because of pity, Kathy, I said. Kathy scoffed. Oh, really? Then why did he wire you 50 grand? He paid me because he spent 2 months falling in love with my mind over text messages, thinking he was talking to you. I said, my voice steady and resonant. He paid me $50,000 because he was terrified you, your family, and his board of directors would find out that the brilliant, untouchable Dominic Lancaster is actually a coward who couldn't tell the difference between a pretty face and the soul he actually loved. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Kathy's eyes went wide, her jaw dropping. She whipped her head around to look at Dominic. What? What is she talking about? Dominic couldn't look her in the eye. He stared at the floor, his shoulders trembling. Ask him, Kathy. I continued softly, taking a step closer. Ask him about the late-night calls. Ask him about the photos of his coffee in London. Ask him about the shower photo he sent when I teased him. Or better yet, ask him why he hasn't touched you once since you went to the Hamptons. It's because every time he looks at you, he's reminded of the girl he actually wanted, and the girl he was too weak to keep. Dominic. Kathy's voice cracked, her perfect facade crumbling into a mask of pure horror and humiliation. Is this true? Dominic didn't answer. He couldn't. His silence was the loudest confession possible. With a choked sob, Kathy threw her champagne glass to the floor, the crystal shattering with a sharp, echoing crash, before she turned and fled the ballroom, her gold dress trailing behind her. Dominic stood alone in the center of the whispering crowd. He slowly raised his head, his eyes landing on me one last time. There was a profound, devastating regret in his gaze, a realization of exactly what he had thrown away. I didn't say another word to him. I didn't need to. I turned to Rowan, who was looking down at me with an expression of quiet pride and something warmer, deeper, and infinitely more real than any fantasy. Shall we go? Rowan asked, offering his arm. Yes, I said, slipping my hand into his. Let's get out of here. We walked out of the glittering ballroom, leaving the whispers, the ghosts, and the empty billions behind us, stepping together into the crisp, clean winter night.